Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Joe Ellis. I'm a commercial wedding and portrait photographer in Dallas, Texas. And today I want to talk about processing your Olympus files in RAW converters for the best possible high ISO performance. But the first thing I have to do before we start talking about this is give you guys a bunch of disclaimers. And the first one is simple, and that is that I think 99% of what makes an image great happens before we ever get to this stage. You know, the light, moment, gesture, all of those things that happen at the moment of capture, to me are far more important in terms of my whether or not I will like a photograph than anything that happens here. So this is all kind of small potatoes in my book, but given that most of us post-process our images and a lot of us shoot RAW files, we have to do this anyway, so we may as well make the most of it. So the second disclaimer I have is that it's almost impossible to do objective testing with this kind of stuff. Everybody's tastes vary, so I might have 5 people love one version of a photo, post-process is slightly different, I have a different 5 people like that photo better. So you're going to have to take all of this into consideration as you're thinking about which RAW converter would be best for you and what you really like in a photo. And so it could be that your tastes have a preference for one RAW converter over another. And there are, of course, dozens of options here. I'm going to show you guys 3 of them today. We're going to talk about Olympus Viewer, or OV3. We'll talk about Lightroom, and we'll talk about Capture One. And that's because those are the ones I kind of have at my fingertips, and they're also the ones that I am the most comfortable with. And I don't want to give you guys advice on software that I'm not 100% proficient at. There are lots of other options out there, including On1, Luminar, DxO, what else is there? There's a ton of them, and I think they're all kind of awesome. And each one of those, especially the smaller brands, have lots of really unique features. So definitely go out there and look through those and see what you think and try them out. I know I have. And there are some things like in Luminar, for example, that I think are totally awesome. And so that piece of software, standalone, is almost worth having just for those unique features. Okay, the next disclaimer I want to make is that price is a really big deal here. You know, Lightroom costs at least $10 a month on a perpetual license. A Capture One has both perpetual licenses, and also, like, you can pay $300 for the standalone version of it. And then, you know, Olympus Viewer is free; it comes with your camera. So, how much you're willing to spend and what you're willing to work with there definitely plays into it. And that just has to do with, you know, how much you want to invest in your profession or in your hobby or whatever it is for you. So, you know, there's definitely a huge consideration there. A lot of these options, you know, come in much less than the top end software choices like Capture One and Lightroom. So definitely think about that as well. And then the last thing is that some of these softwares have really unique tools in them. Like, for example, if you're tethering, Capture One is definitely a preference among professionals. Whereas if you really love a certain set of presets and you're looking to buy some presets from a photographer that you love because you love their toning, then Lightroom is definitely going to be the choice for you. So that can play a huge role in which one that you pick as well. So once we get beyond all of those things, then we start to look at you know, the unique characteristics in terms of how each of these pieces of software handles noise. So let's jump into the computer here. I'm going to show you what I did. I'll walk you through the steps that I went through, and then hopefully at least helps give you a little jump start on picking a software that might be right for you, or maybe it'll keep you from spending money that you don't have to. Okay. So here we are over in the computer, and I'm going to first show you guys the 3 finished photos that I have here in Photoshop, just briefly. So these are labeled here. This one over here on the left is Olympus Viewer, the one in the middle is Capture One, and the one on the right is Lightroom. And it's really important to note that I am going to post the images, links to the images in the description of this video, so you can look at them at high resolution and not just in a YouTube video. And that is super critical to this process, because obviously YouTube videos have tons of their own compression, and so you're not seeing exactly what I'm seeing here as we're looking at the video. But I'll be your eyes and ears and tell you guys what I think, and then you guys can take a look at the high-res files and decide for yourselves. Okay, so let's look at each of the different tools here. So here is our image in Lightroom. Now, the thing I did to each of these files is that I did a custom white balance on the white cloth here behind his back at exactly the same point. Because one of the things you're going to notice if you jump between these programs and you just load up images is that each of them has their own unique color if you dial in the temperature. believe it or not, if you dial in a temperature and a tint that are like a specific number, like say 3000 Kelvin for a white balance, the color is going to vary pretty drastically, especially between Lightroom and Capture One. But if we go ahead and grab the eyedropper tool and we pick a point here to set the white balance, that gets the color of the three photos pretty gosh darn close. Okay, and then, the only other thing I did to each of these files is that I went down to the Detail tab here in Lightroom, and you can see this is an ISO 3200 file shot with the 75mm lens at f1.8 and 125th of a second. It's a very sharp file. And just to show you guys how much of the photo we're looking at, here is the full screen, or the fit to view of the entire image here. And if we zoom into 1:1, that's how much of the image we're looking at. I first of all think that it's doing outstanding. I think this is a great performance for ISO 3200, and we are definitely pushing the envelope in terms of available darkness for me to shoot in at this wedding. This is a pretty dark church, so instead of using my 40 to 150 at f2.8, I went ahead and used my 75 at f1.8 because I wanted the extra shutter speed and the lower ISO overall. Now, huge caveat, I'll say this again at the end. The number one thing I would tell you about, or maybe two things I would tell you about high ISO files, and I said this in another video. Number one, do not underexpose your high ISO files. If you underexpose them, you will have trouble, and you will hate the noise that comes from that. And that's true not just of Olympus cameras, but of many cameras that are out there. The second thing is that a sharp file is critical for high ISO performance. If your image is not sharp, if it's just a little off in terms of focus or whatever, or shake, then you are again going to be staring at a lot more noise because your eye won't have any good detail to latch onto. Okay, so I did a custom white balance. I adjusted the noise in each of these files to my taste. In this case here we have sharpening on this part of the panel here for detail, and then here's the noise reduction. And I went through, and if you hold down the Alt or Option key and you run back and forth, you can kind of get a black and white view to kind of help you visualize the grain a little bit better. And I went through and just played with this. I did several different settings and several different runs. This was my favorite compromise for this image, and I think it turned out pretty well. And so this would be my normal workflow for a wedding image through Lightroom. Of course, I would adjust color a little bit more than this, and so on and so forth. But in terms of noise reduction, this is kind of where I would land. And I think this would make a perfectly amazing 11 by 17 or 16 by 20 inch print from a ISO 3200 file. It looks outstanding with that in that regard. So there's the whole image, and then here is the same picture at 1:1. Okay, so let's jump into Capture One. So here we are in Capture One, and we did exactly the same things here. Okay, we did went into the color tab, and we went ahead and grabbed our eyedropper, and we did an eyedropper from right here in the same point behind his back, and it gives slightly different numbers in order to get a similar color. So in this case, Lightroom was up around 31 and 100 Kelvin, and here in Capture One we're at 2900, and of course the tint is completely different numbers and all that kind of good stuff. So definitely it changes things. Also, just to note, the ICC profile here is the EM1 Mark II generic, whereas when you're in Lightroom and you're looking at setting a preset for color, they of course have some more options now, and I picked camera neutral. So that plays a role in the color. And I find, just as when I'm canvassing friends and family as to which photo they like best, the color winds up being a bigger issue for them. They'll pick a picture based on color before they will ever pick one based on grain. But again, here we are in Capture One, and I adjusted the luminance, noise reduction, detail, and color until I found the very best mix that I possibly can. I find that when you guys are looking at these high-res files, this watch is particularly interesting because there's obviously a lot of small detail there that you can look at. And of course, like the detail here in his hair and whatnot is also equally important. One area of differentiation that I found is looking at the noise in his jacket, in these super dark tones down here. There is some difference between the three converters in that area, more so than in others. So definitely, as you're looking at the high-res files, take a peek at that. And then let's jump into Olympus Viewer, our free option. So here in Olympus Viewer, I went ahead and did a white balance here, raw. And so you can go in and do a gray point specification right over here. And then the noise filter only has a few different settings. These are the ones you find in the camera. So, you know, high, standard, low, and off. I went through the three of them. I kind of chose high as the one I thought did the best job with this particular image. Again, your mileage may vary, but that's the one I didn't feel like it destroyed enough detail. You know, it was a good balance. It didn't destroy a lot of detail in the image, so I went with the high version. You can totally process this. Of course, it's free through the 3 or 4 different options you have in noise filters, and see which one you like best. But this totally did it. And then the only other thing about this particular one is that even though I did the same custom white balance, I really felt like the color that was coming out of it was a little bit muddier compared to the other ones. So in the edit tab under color, I went in here and gave it a little bit more red and yellow. And that is just my preference. I just wanted to match the color a little more closely to the other 2 files, and that's the best way I could find to do it. So your mileage may vary there. You know, if you guys have ideas or comments for me, definitely write them down. Let me know, and we can discuss. So let's go back to Photoshop. So here we are, guys, and you know, first of all, I would say, like I said in one of the comments on the OMD education group, I don't see more than 5 or 10% difference between the 3 of these. I think that in terms of the most amount of detail in the image, you know, it's really, really close call. You know, like if you're looking at her hair here, it appears there's maybe a slightly more detail in her hair in this image and in this image, but there's less noise in the Lightroom image overall. So I'm going to call that kind of a wash. As we're looking down here at his jacket, one area where I feel like Capture One is losing a little bit is that it's a little less neutral down here. We're seeing a little more green pop in and a little more blocky representation of the noise. So it's not as smooth. Let's go ahead and bump these up to 200%. As I zoom in here, this gets a little tougher, and now we're talking about really big prints, guys. So I have a ISO 3200 file. But here you can see that the Lightroom version of this probably has the least amount of noise. If we're looking at the watch, I think it has ever so slightly less detail in the watch compared to the Capture One. And then, of course, the Olympus Viewer here probably has the most amount of noise in it. And again, I can't adjust it as much as I can with the other 2 pieces of software. But it's a pretty good compromise. You know, I don't think it's doing a bad job. Now, the one thing about Olympus Viewer, of course, is that the workflow through Olympus Viewer is pretty awful if you're trying to get through a lot of files. So that probably plays a bigger role in anything in terms of getting through pictures. Again, even with biasing the color a little bit, I think this one looks a little more neutral, sort of more like Lightroom. Capture One has a little bit more red in it. And again, those are, of course, very adjustable things that you could go through and tweak. And you would only ever notice those things if you're doing direct comparisons between different raw converters. But you might have a preference for color. A lot of people love the color coming out of Capture One. I know I do. But again, you know, that's a matter of taste more than anything. So in the end, I think there's not more than 5 or 10% difference between these files in terms of their ability to process images for high ISO. I personally would give the overall lead to Lightroom. Others might have different opinions, but that's where I'm at right now. All right, guys, so let's sum up. The first thing is, please don't try and judge any of this from the YouTube feed, because the quality coming through on the video just does not do any of this justice, and you really can't make meaningful comparisons unless you're looking at, you know, high-res versions in something like Photoshop. So I'm going to post the links to these photos in the description below. Please download them, take a peek, and that way you can get a more accurate comparison. Do your own testing. I really think that, you know, this is going to vary a lot by subject matter and by your tastes and by your experience with different software. The one you're most experienced with might be the one that really works best for you, or maybe it's time to go in a different direction and you really, really love some of the things that, Capture One has in terms of manipulating color, for example, or the workflow that it has, that might make a bigger difference overall to your work than how it processes noise and high ISOs. Nik, On One, Luminar, DxO, all of those programs are amazing. I've heard a lot about them. I've trialed most of them. When I go through and do global noise reduction on those different softwares, I find that they don't do quite as good a job as what I get from Capture One and Lightroom. That's my own personal experience, and that's global adjustments. I know some of those programs allow you to go through and make localized adjustments to different areas of the photo to reduce noise in one area and so on and so forth. And I can't get that complicated in this video. Obviously that's all possible, and things you can do in Lightroom and in Photoshop and so on and so forth. So if that really works for you, then go for it. I really like some of those softwares. I love Luminar, for example, has a few filters that I really love. So if you were really into that, then that software might be a great solution for you. If you process hundreds of files and you need a really great workflow solution, then Lightroom is going to be probably top of the heap, although Capture One does a great job too. I just want to reiterate that our Olympus cameras do a fantastic job at high ISO. So don't be afraid to get out there and shoot. Use whatever ISO you need to capture the image. Image content, light, gesture, moment, so on and so forth will always trump the technical stuff. Please don't be afraid and don't worry about it so much. By the time you get this stuff into print, and if you have great image content, the noise in the image isn't going to be that big of a deal. And then last but not least, I wanted to just reiterate that if you want the best of the best in terms of noise performance, do not underexpose your high ISO files and make sure you nail the focus. Those are key. That's my notes for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'll see you guys in the next one.